What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Raw Prospect Podcast, episode 161. Today is Tuesday, April 4th, 2023. And we're going to be wrapping up the college basketball season today. Going to cover, UConn's championship victory, the fallout for some of the teams that lost. And then to close the show, we're going to be doing a fun uh, list that has to do with the NBA before the playoffs. But before that, as always, from Austin, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Wayne. What's up?
The end of the college basketball season, the end of March Madness. We have arrived. We have a new champion for the fifth time since 1999. The Uconn Huskies have won March Madness more than any other team. We will be discussing their run to the championship and whether or not they should be considered a blue blood, along with many of the other generally accepted blue bloods that we talk about all the time. That has been a big talking point since they won last night. We will also be talking about the fallout for the historic runs of Florida Atlantic, who lost in the semifinal to San Diego State, and San Diego State, who made the national championship game but was no match for UConn. Well, I'll do a little look ahead to the transfer portal, which will be a huge part of this college basketball offseason, along with the NBA draft. Some of these players already have declared. And then also we will be doing a list later in the show that we will wait to talk about then. Episode 161, be sure you check out our Patreon channel where we will be posting content, probably not weekly, but at least like a couple times a month. We will have content up on our Patreon. And then we always have about 2 live streams per week on our normal YouTube channel. So make sure to check us out there. Like and subscribe as well.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate, the stuff on there is free. It's basically available for free, and any whatever you're willing to pay would be much appreciated. But you can access all that stuff for free over on our Patreon.
And even though March Madness is over and we're going to wrap up the college basketball season, put a good bow tie on it in this episode, there is so much else that is going on in sports. I know we don't particularly talk about hockey on this podcast, but for those of you who do watch hockey, I know the NHL playoffs is starting pretty soon. The NBA playoffs were a little less than 2 weeks out, I believe, at least from the play-in tournament. We have, some other NBA discussions to get to. We have the NFL draft coming up here in about 3.5 weeks, so we'll have more draft content. I think tomorrow we'll be doing that along with a Masters preview because it's Masters week. It's one of the biggest weeks, I think, in sports is this week right here, where you have the Final Four, the national championship, and then the Masters. It's one of my favorite weeks every year on the calendar. So I wanted to start today's episode with Prospect of the Week. I have one. I'm not sure if you do. I can go first if you need some time to think.
Okay.
So there's been some controversy ever since the women's championship game between Iowa and LSU, which resulted in LSU winning. The trash talk between Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark, that controversy itself we'll probably touch on in a Patreon episode later this week. But I went with Angel Reese as sort of my cop-out prospect of the week. She was dominant. And I know Caitlin Clark was as well, but I mentioned her in our last episode that we did prospect of the week. She averaged 31 and 10, was absolutely fantastic, got Iowa to the national championship game. But Angel Reese, only a sophomore, she'll be back for LSU, and Kim Mulkey, who actually won her 4th national championship as coach. She's elevating herself into another pantheon when we talk about women's college basketball coaches and just college basketball coaches in general. She won 3 titles when she was at Baylor, and in her first season at LSU, She leads LSU to their first women's college basketball championship. And a large part of that was because of their best player, Angel Reese, sophomore guard slash. She's sort of a point forward in a way. She's really good. She averaged 21 points and 15 rebounds over the course of the tournament, 6 games. She averaged 23 and 15 during the course of the entire regular season. She led all of women's college basketball in double doubles. She won the NCAA tournament Most Outstanding Player Award, which is pretty crazy considering that this tournament also had Caitlin Clark, who I think is a generational talent in the women's game. And then I found this stat on Twitter. This is going to blow most of y'all's minds if I had to guess. Since 2000, if we include the NBA, the WNBA, and then both men's and women's Division I college basketball. So NBA, WNBA, and then both men's and women's Division I college basketball. Since 2000, if we include all of those leagues, there have been over 5.2 million individual 6-game spans by individual players. And Angel Reese, in that time period, is the only player to have a 6-game stretch where that player averaged more than 20 points per game, more than 15 rebounds per game, more than 2.5 assists per game, more than 2.5 blocks per game, and more than 2.5 steals per game. Again, she's the only player since 2000 in the NBA, the WNBA, or both men's and women's college basketball Division I in 23 years to have a 6-game span where that player averages at least that stat line right there. That's just insane. That's how dominant she was during this title run. And we will get to the trash talking controversy that's blown up social media and the traditional media as well over the past 48 hours. But that is ridiculous. So Angel Reese, and she'll be back for LSU next year because she is not WNBA draft eligible yet. So another star that you'll get to keep watching along with Caitlin Clark back in the women's game next year. So I'm actually looking forward to watching more women's college basketball going into next season.
Yeah, absolutely. And Angel Reese is a perfect example of a player that we made prospect of the week for. Her play isn't what's getting talked about right now, and it's important to reiterate how amazing of a player she is. And that stat really encapsulates it. I mean, that's just perfect. To be in like that high of company, there's no debating how good of a player she is if you look at from that standpoint. For my prospect of the week, I've gone over to the men's side of things, and I've gone with Adama Sanogo, 6'9" center for the national champion Uconn Huskies. I just think when I watch him play, I just think, wow, as a undersized center, he's able to do so many things on the floor. He, doesn't necessarily have the best jump shot. Well, I mean, however, he does shoot, the occasional 15-footer and can knock that shot down. But even so, even without, a 3-point game or whatever the case may be, I think he's a very interesting player to look at in terms of the NBA draft. And I don't know if he's declared yet, but if he were to declare, and if he were to declare next year, either way, someone who is 6'9", can defend multiple positions, runs the floor, is a high energy player, and can finish around the rim, that's someone who can provide a lot of value to an NBA basketball team. I think he would fit with, you could plug him in as a pick and roll big who could defend the rim on just about any team in the NBA next year, and he would play his role and he would do it well. And I think it was worth giving him credit for just how good of a not only tournament he had, but a season as a whole.
Absolutely. He's a guy who, in that semifinal game, I believe, right out of the gate, stepped out and knocked down 2 threes to give UConn some early separation in that Miami game. And that was like, whoa, okay, if he's going to be doing that, along with all the other things that he does, it was just hard for Miami to get back in the game from there. But that actually, since you mentioned UConn, I wanted to mention one note and then we can move on. It's actually amazing that, and I didn't know this until I believe it was yesterday afternoon, that Jordan Hawkins, the projected NBA first round pick and the point guard for, or the shooting guard for UConn, is actually cousins with Angel Reese. And they both won national championships on back-to-back days. And that's
Wow.
why during the post-game press conference, you heard the media ask him about that, like what it means for, him and his cousin, who are both stars in their respective, on their respective teams and in their respective sports, to like the faces of March Madness this year, per se, in some respects, to win national championships on back-to-back days. I mean, that's some special stuff right there. So if you did not know that, that's a pretty cool nugget that I learned yesterday. But that's a perfect segue into our next topic today, which is just our overall takeaways from this UConn run. And then we'll have a discussion whether or not we think UConn should be a blue blood, and if not, where do they fit in that conversation? So let's just first talk about UConn's run. They won all their games by 13 or more points. They're the first team to do that, and I believe they're the sixth team in NCAA tournament history to win all their games by double digits. They had a combined average margin of victory of 20 points per game. They only trailed in the second half for, I believe, a total of 55 seconds during this tournament. And from start to finish, they
I'm doing a
really had
podcast, bro.
control of every single game. And you look at this roster, Dan Hurley did a fantastic job of getting guys in the transfer portal and meshing them together. So I just want to get your thoughts overall on their run, what you thought were the keys, and then we can talk about UConn as possibly being a blue blood.
Well, to put it simply, I mean, you can put this against just about any playoff run in the sport of basketball, and it would hold up in terms of dominance in their respective sports. I mean, uh, even the Lakers playoff run in 2000 or the Warriors playoff run in 2017. I mean, there's something to be said about a team that whatever style of ball they play, whatever of style of team they face, they just find a way to win and they win big every single time. Um, I think that's what's most impressive about it. I think you got late in the tournament and, you know, everybody was talking about their second half dominance. And to the point where I think their opposing team, the team they were facing, even were bracing for it a little bit. And even so, they still were able to have big runs in the second half. Um, that's what I thought was really impressive. I mean, it's one thing to, sneak up on people. It's not like they were throughout this tournament. That's definitely not the case. But it's an entirely other thing to um, be late in a tournament, be the be the overrunning favorite, and completely dominate and handle business in high stakes games.
Exactly. And one thing I want to mention before we move on to the blue blood discussion is I think something that went under the radar and wasn't talked about enough by everyone except maybe Uconn fans, was this team's defense. They held every single team that they played in this tournament run to under 40% from the field. Their defense was absolutely fantastic. I mean, we talk about Andre Jackson being that lead perimeter defender. And then we talk about, Klingon and Sonogo doing a great job of getting on the offensive glass and protecting, or the defensive glass and protecting the rim. Getting the steals on the perimeter, being great in transition. They were just a well-rounded basketball team. And look, Newton, their point guard, Tristan Newton, he got a lot of criticism put on him during the middle of the season when UConn went through that rough stretch where they lost, I believe it was 6 of 8 games after they started the season undefeated. And by the way, this team played a total of 17 non-conference opponents this year, including regular season and the NCAA tournament. And they went 17-0 against non-conference competition, and they won all of those games by an average of 24 points.
Wow.
That's how dominant this team was, except for that little 8-game stretch in like the middle of January and early February where they really struggled. But now looking back on it, you can make the argument that although that we throughout the season we thought the Big 12 was top to bottom the best conference in college basketball, which I still think it probably was, but the Big East was right there with them. I mean, you had Creighton make the Elite Eight. You had UConn win the national championship. You know, the Big East in this tournament did really well. And I think that, even when Villanova was in a down year, they, with St. John's now hiring Rick Pitino, with what he did with Iona the past couple of years, and some of the coaches moving around within this league. I mean, Georgetown just hired Ed Cooley from Providence. Some of the new coaching hires and some of the players that are coming to the elite programs in this league, with Creighton potentially returning all their guys next year. They're going to be preseason top 10 or 12 team. UConn will probably reload. They're already like co-favorites with, I believe, UCLA to win next year's championship. There are a lot of really good teams in the Big. Providence had a solid year. The list goes on and on. I think we might be entering another like golden age of Big East basketball, like there was in like the mid 2000s, early 2010s, when we saw UConn make their other runs with the Kimball Walkers of the world and that sort of thing. We saw Butler get to the Final Four one time. Marquette, they're going to be a team that returns most of their starters. I forgot about them. But they deserve credit under what they did with Shaka Smart this year. I mean, the Big East is a really strong league. I think looking back on it, you could probably say that the Big East and the Big 12 are probably like co-favorites for the best conference in college basketball this year. And I guess that can bring us to our next discussion, which is UConn a blue blood? I'll let you go first.
Well, it's a loaded question because you have to be able to define what a blue blood is, and I think that's mostly personal. Like you can define it in multiple different ways, and for me personally, I think a blue blood is a team that, for one, consistently gets hot at the right time, meaning February, March, into the tournament. And then number two, like has consistent, dominance in the tournament once they're in. And you can say like what you want about, being able to win your conference tournament and win the regular season title in your conference as well. But I think at the end of the day, the tournament is what matters. And the one thing you can say about UConn is every time that they've had a, somewhat contending team, And even at times when they haven't, they've delivered in the tournament time and time again. And the fact that they're 5-0 in national championship games, I mean that's incredible. I mean that's that's nothing to scoff at. That's no small feat. Um, the thing I'll say is the next step would be consistency. That's the one thing that program has been missing is, you know, they'll have their run of 3 or 4 years where they're fantastic, and then maybe an 8 year stretch where they're not so good. So that's the only thing. But at the same time, I would compare it to possibly like the New York Giants, for example. Like it seems like the New York Giants, whenever they're in the playoffs or in the Eli Manning era, even that's probably more specifically what I'd refer to. The Eli Manning era New York Giants, whenever they made the playoffs, you didn't want to face them. I think of it kind of like that, just as a team that's built for March.
Yeah, I mean, I think I view it similarly to you. Here's what I'll say. UConn's blue blood status over the long term, over the course of college basketball history, not just because if you take just the past quarter century, past 25 years, there's certainly a blue blood.
Right, right.
But if you want to go back further to when, the Dukes and the Kentuckys and the UCLAs and, the Indianas, even the Kansases had already like established themselves and become like the generally accepted blue bloods that we think of today. And you can even make the argument that like
Michigan.
Michigan State with Tom Izzo is, I think they're in a similar pantheon with UConn. But if you take the full course of college basketball history, you probably don't say that UConn is like a solidified blue blood. But here's what I'll say. There's no denying that I think UConn is part of what I would call college basketball royalty. I believe they are a top 10-ish program all time, like along with the Dukes, the Kentuckys, the UCLAs, Michigan State. I mean, the list goes on, right? So you can't really deny that UConn is college basketball royalty. I mean, they have consistent success in the tournament when they get in the tournament. Now, for my answer to this question, if I had to choose, I would say that I think UConn should be considered a blue blood, and I'll explain why here in a minute. But if I did like a tiers list of the blue bloods, they would probably be in like the lower tier, just because they're a newer blood. Like I think they're a newer blue blood is how I would describe it. But I do think they are a blue blood. Now we already talked about their dominance over this tournament run. I mean, I don't need to remind you, but they're the first team to win all 6 of their tournament games by 13 points or more. And they won by an average of 20 points per game, which is the second largest average margin of victory over a course of the tournament for a championship team. The largest was, I believe, the 2008-2009 North Carolina team. Now, we all know, what they did and what they accomplished this season, which is incredible considering that there was a point in the season on that, whatever it was, 6-game losing streak where people said UConn's dead. They're not even going to make the tournament. They won't be the same. They're dead. They were, I believe, like 14-8 at one point, and they were on a bad trajectory. But they got it together, and give credit to Dan Hurley. He said in a press conference, "You better catch us now because we're going to figure this thing out, and when we do, it's going to be tough to beat us." But just in terms of why I think they should be a blue blood, 5 national championships in the last quarter decade. So quarter century, I mean. That's more than any other of these teams that we consider blue bloods. In fact, the second most in that time period would be Duke and Carolina, who each have 3. So they have 2 more national championships in the past quarter century than any other program in college basketball. There's something to be said for that. But the thing that I think is impressive, and this is not a knock on the Carolinas or the Dukes or all the Kansases that have had one great coach for a long period of time. I mean, Kansas with Bill Self. You think Duke with Coach K, who just retired last year. You think of Carolina with Roy Williams. You think of Kentucky with Coach Calipari. Like, it's not to discredit those programs. That's perfect. If you have a great coach and he's a legend, you keep him as a coach. And I'm not discrediting that. But what I will say is there's something to be said for winning 5 national championships and being able to readapt yourself as a program when you have head coaching turnover. Uconn has won these 5 national championships with 3 different head coaches. Their first 3 came with Jim Calhoun, who's one of the greater college basketball coaches of all time that nobody talks about. Then the 2011 run or 2014 run came with Kevin Ollie, who was then dismissed because of some allegations or some scandal that went on. And then this year with Dan Hurley, 3 different head coaches won national championships at this program. And I think there's something to be said for that. It's not to discredit the programs that just win with one great all-time coach. But I think in order to be considered like a blue blood, like the elite class of college basketball, your program has to be able to win in any situation. And we sort of saw, we thought it might be that way with Hubert Davis, and I think it still could be at Carolina. But then we saw what happened this year. And so, and we're seeing what John Shire's doing at Duke, and he'll probably, those programs will be really good, I think, forever just because of the resources. But I think UConn's in a similar discussion, and they've done it in a different way, which I think should be applauded. 6 Final Fours. In their Final Fours, they're 10-1 in their Final 4 games. That's a 90.9% winning percentage, highest of any program all time. They're 5-0, as you mentioned, in national championship games. There's something to be said for that. They've done it with 3 different coaches. The only thing I think you can say is there's 2 things I think you can say. If you're a fan of longevity, even though 25 years I would still say is a pretty damn long time. If you're a fan of longevity and consistency, UConn, and you mentioned this, they haven't necessarily had the consistency that these other programs have had. I mean, Carolina has a down year every now and then. Duke has a down year every now and then. But those teams have consistently been in the tournament year after year after year after year after year. And with UConn, they've actually, in the same token that they've won 5 national championships over the last 25 years, they've also missed the tournament 8 times. So there is sort of a balancing act there where you can make the argument, and I see it both ways, where you can say, yes, when they get there, they do really well and they're a really successful program, and maybe they're not a blue blood, but I need to see more consistency. They need to get there more often. And so I think the real answer probably lies somewhere in the middle. Like, they are in college basketball royalty. They might not be like a solidified blue blood like these other programs are, but they're the next closest thing. I think that's probably where we can meet in the middle, like on that middle ground. I think that's fair. And so that's sort of how I view it. I mean, if I had to choose, I would give them the title of blue blood. It just might not be the type of blue blood that like the Dukes and the Carolinas and the Kentuckys and the Kansases are. If that makes sense. Right. I think you can have different differentiating categories. You can draw lines between the different statuses of each of these programs. So that's sort of how I would sum it up.
Okay. Well, to end this, I just want to ask you, in order for them to solidify themselves as a blue blood in the eyes of the public, not just you, what do you think that would take? Do you think, say in 5 years' time, they make it to the tournament 5 times in a row, but they only, get past the first weekend once or twice? Would that, like, what do you think would be the gauge there?
I think, in my opinion, now that they have things going under Dan Hurley, who took over in 2017 for I forget who it was. Now that they have things going, though, I think now that you've made the national championship, you won the national championship, and you set the bar high, I think if they were able to make the tournament consistently over the next half decade, so make it every year, and then get one more Final Four appearance in that time span. I think if they make one more Final Four appearance, they don't even have to win the national championship. Although if they do, I think that automatically does the job because then they'd be tied with Carolina and Duke, and they'd be like climbing up the list for national championships. They're already tied for, I believe, third or fourth. So if they win the national championship in the next 5 years, they're definitely, I think, would be solidified. But I think the threshold is make the tournament consistently the next 5 years. I give you like maybe one down year in between. Things happen in college basketball. And now with COVID and everything else, it can be tough with the circumstances in the transfer portal, and you never know what can happen. But if they make the tournament like 4 out of the next 5 years and they get to another Final Four appearance, which they're already favored to possibly repeat next year, and they're going to be a really good team, I think that solidifies. That does the job. But that's just my opinion. So with that, we can move on. Let's talk about, unless you have anything else you wanted to add.
No, that's it.
Okay. I want to quickly address and acknowledge the success that two other programs had during this tournament run to sort of wrap everything up on this particular Final Four and college basketball season, particularly March Madness. It was a unique tournament where we had a 5 seed in San Diego State who doesn't necessarily play the most attractive style of basketball, but they were a really good team, and they showed why over the course of this tournament with a bunch of comeback victories. And their defense and their physicality was impressive. They made their second Final Four in school history. And they've had some really good teams over the course of, the past 10, 15 years. They had the 2020 season when the tournament was canceled because of COVID. They were 30-2 and ranked in the top 5, and they were one of the favorites to win the national championship. Who knows what would have happened if the tournament had not gotten canceled that year, but we'll never know. But they were really, really good that year. Every season, I believe, except one since 2005, they won 20-plus games in the regular season. And then all the way back in the late 90s, I believe they did make another Final Four. So they've been a pretty consistent college basketball Western powerhouse over the past 20 or so years. But I want to talk about, like, we'll start with San Diego State since I've already talked about them a little bit, and then we'll go to Florida Atlantic. What do you think this does for the future of the San Diego State basketball program? Like, now will they be viewed in a different light, the ways that Gonzaga is on the West Coast and the ways that UCLA is? Maybe not in that certain light, but will they be viewed as, like, when you think of Western Coast college basketball powerhouses or like mainstays, will you think of San Diego State? Like, this, does this put them on the national map moving forward?
My answer to that would be maybe. There's still, the issue with, not a lot of people would stay up for their games and all of that type of stuff. That's a problem with any West Coast team, even in professional sports. But I think San Diego State is a good enough school and a big enough school to become that. Absolutely. There have been, prominent basketball players who have San Diego State as their alma mater. And now with the coach that they have and the style of play, I think there's a lot of young basketball players that definitely would choose San Diego State. Absolutely. I think it would just come down to, will they have some sustained winning over the next couple of seasons. For me, it's a question of, okay, you made the national championship. Okay, now what's next? How do you move forward? How do you continue to push forward from this? To me, I think in the next couple of years, I'd see them kind of in a similar light to, say, Oregon, possibly, because Oregon's had some pretty good teams in the past few years, but they're not necessarily in the same light as, say, a Gonzaga or a UCLA.
Yeah, I think this does put them on the national map. I think with Brian Dutcher, who took over for Steve Fisher in 2017, and has sort of put this program back where they belong, because San Diego State's been really good in the past. I don't think a lot of people know that. And they have some notable alumni, some notable guys who are playing now in the NBA, the most notable of which being Kawhi Leonard. And that 2011 team was actually a really good team. They just ran into Kemba Walker during that tournament run, and that's why they didn't
Small
go as
world.
far as they probably should have. But sometimes, you just run into those type of teams. Like back, I believe it was 2008, Texas's last appearance in the Sweet 16. They got all the way to the Sweet 16 early Elite Eight, but they just ran into Derrick Rose, a future NBA MVP. And if they hadn't run into Derrick Rose, well, they may have gone further. But it was just like that one guy that prevented them from, going further than they should have. But the point being, San Diego State's had some really good teams over the past 20, 25 years. I think for the future, since Brian Dutcher has proven that he's adaptable, he can go and build teams through the transfer portal, which I think you're seeing a lot more teams trying to do that. And the teams that do that well are having more success in the tournament. I mean, all of these schools in the Final Four this year built a lot of their roster out of the transfer portal. You think of San Diego State in particular, Darian Trammell from the transfer portal, Matt Bradley from the transfer portal. The list goes on and on and on. Same thing for Florida Atlantic. Same thing for Uconn. I mean, forgetting the guy who knocked down a couple threes, Calcaterra for Uconn. He's from the transfer portal. And I believe Tristan Newton is as well. So, I mean, a lot of the skeletons of these rosters were built through the transfer portal. And Brian Dutcher has shown that he's a really good recruiter. He recruits the West Coast very well out of high school, and he can build teams through the transfer portal. He's very good defensively. Defense travels, especially on neutral courts in the tournament. That proved itself as well. I think they will be – I'll put it this way. I think over the next 5 to 10 years, San Diego State under Brian Dutcher can be a consistent top 25-ish program. I think that's realistic, and I think you will see them make some deeper runs in the tournament, and they will be talked about more in the national media and the national scope when we talk about college basketball. They're probably not going to – you're right. They're not going to be viewed in the same light as a UCLA or even a Gonzaga possibly, since Gonzaga has established themselves more in terms of tournament success and year-over-year success, like elite success, more than San Diego State has. But they will be a powerful mid-major, like one of the more powerful mid-majors, and that's good for college basketball, along with possibly Florida Atlantic. And I think if you're San Diego State and you want to take the next step, you look to with all the conference relocation that we have going on right now, I'd look to maybe join a Power 5 conference. I mean, you have openings in the Pac-12, and you're right there on the West Coast. I mean, UCLA and USC are leaving for the Big Ten after next year, and there are openings in the Pac-12 who's just about to sign a new television deal. You could join the Pac-12, and then the Big 12, even though they have some teams joining already next season in Houston, Cincinnati, UCF, and BYU, they're looking to expand even more. I believe the Big 12 commissioner is looking to get a team in every time zone. And they're just missing a team, I believe, from the Western time zone. So I mean, those are two conferences that you could potentially join and elevate yourself to the Power Five level. You could be viewed in a totally different light. I think that might be the next step that could potentially benefit San Diego State moving forward, especially if like next year they do something similar again where they get to the second weekend and they're having consistent, sustained success in the tournament. Yeah, I think you definitely look at that if you're San Diego State.
Right.
But let's talk about Florida Atlantic because they were the other mid-major, and they're actually moving from Conference USA, who was a really good league this year. They proved it in the NIT and throughout this NCAA tournament. They had a historic season, 35-4, best record, most wins by any school this year. They were actually top 20 in KenPom. They finished 17th in the final KenPom rankings. So, I mean, take that with however much of a scoop of salt that you want. KenPom isn't everything, but it's a pretty good indicator of like where you stand within the ranks of college basketball. They won their first Conference USA regular season title. They won their first Conference USA tournament title, and they had only been to the NCAA tournament once before this, and they were knocked out in the first game that they played. So they actually won their first NCAA tournament games throughout this tournament and got all the way to the Final Four, where they ran into San Diego State and were one stop away from getting to the national championship game. And they were about a couple inches away if, what is his name? The guy who knocked down the game-winning shot. I'm blanking on his name. But if he steps out of bounds, Florida Atlantic's in the national championship game. Now, he did it, and he made a great shot, and credit to him. But they were one stop away from being in the Natty. So it says a lot about Florida Atlantic, I think. But next year, they're actually moving to the American Athletic Conference, and they're projected to return everybody. Their coach, every single player on that roster is coming back next year. So they're going to be a top 10 team preseason just because of their continuity. They're going to keep their coach, Dusty May. I mean, there's no real like big job openings right now that are threatening to go and get a guy like Dusty May, who I think could potentially be in the next couple of years, the next like Shaka Smart type coach, where he takes like a mid-major on a couple deep tournament runs like Shaka Smart did at VCU, and then he goes to a bigger program and has some success at bigger programs. I think that could be Dusty May in the future, just based on what he's doing with Florida Atlantic. But he's had success through the transfer portal. And with Houston leaving the AAC, Florida Atlantic will likely be one of the co-favorites to win that league next year. It's not going to be as tough as you might think because Houston is leaving. And also I believe UCF is leaving. So, yeah, I mean, what do you think? Where does this leave Florida Atlantic considering all the information that I just laid out for you?
Well, I think the overall feel around Florida Atlantic is overwhelmingly positive. There's no question about that. To me, I think, moving to that American Athletic Conference, I think that's, I mean, what great timing for a move like that. Honestly, that's perfect timing to be able to do that and move to a conference that's more so in the spotlight nationally. But I just think Florida Atlantic, they have a real opportunity to be, in the likes of, historic mid majors that had 2-3 year runs of really great basketball, like say Butler or Loyola Chicago. There's a few here and there as well that I may not be mentioning, but um, I mean, the window is there. There's definitely a championship window there. They can definitely um, be in legit contention next year.
Absolutely. And some of the way too early top 25s. And guys, it is way too early. But Um, People have Florida Atlantic in their top 5, which is saying something considering the talent that they're going to return with John L. Davis, Elijah Martin, all the guys that they have. Their center, Golden, the transfer from Texas Tech. I mean, who played very well late in the tournament, was made a difference for them on the interior. They're going to be with John L. Davis as star point guard, really good guard play. The pace that they play, if they clean up some of the things with their players getting another year of experience, which always matters in college basketball, them having this like tournament run to draw on for future tournament runs, and like some of the adversity that they went through and some of the teams that they beat. Now there will be greater teams, I believe, in the future. I mean, I don't think we had like a really great team this year, like not the level of like at least like 2021 Baylor, but we had a lot of really good teams, and Uconn was one of those. And I think San Diego State could also be put into that category just based on the way that they played and how well coached they were, and just like their physicality and all that. But that's a different discussion for another day. But I do believe that Florida Atlantic will be around for at least the next couple years, depending on like what happens after some of these players leave next year and what may happen with Dusty May if he might leave for another job for another program. It's really hard to say with Florida Atlantic beyond next season. Like it's easier with San Diego State since they have more resources and might move to a Power 5 and they have their coach and they sort of have things established and have done this before as a program, and they sort of had more brand recognition. But Florida Atlantic is a little tougher to tell beyond next year just because they don't have those resources and they're not on that same level. And it's not a shot at them. It's just how it is. Yeah, I mean, I think next year the future is bright. I'll put it that way, for just next year alone. And then once we get to next year, we can address the year after when the time comes. So I wanted to talk about the transfer portal, but I believe we have so much time college basketball off season. How about this? Once we get through the NFL draft and the sports scene calms down just a little bit, we will do a big transfer portal segment once some of these top players start committing to their new schools and rosters start to get rebuilt. We will do a transfer portal segment on our Patreon in like early May. Around that time, we'll take like a month off college basketball, but then in about a month and a half, we'll circle around back to the transfer portal and we'll do that. But since we're already to 48 minutes and we still have our top 5 NBA players list that we're going to get to here in a second, we'll cut that out for today. I did not expect the prospect of the week to go 12 minutes, but that's okay. We are adaptable here on the Raw Prospect Podcast. Let's just give our 1 to 2 minute final words until we speak again about college basketball in 1 to 2 months. How will you remember this season, and what are you looking forward to in the future? Put your final bow tie on this year.
Well, this season will no question be remembered by what an amazing tournament it was. I mean, March Madness delivered and some this year. I mean, it was just absolutely incredible. It checked every single box that you'd want from a March Madness. Upsets, extremely tight, close games between elite programs, buzzer beaters, and I mean this is a debatable box, but you want to see a dominant team, or you want to see the best team win. You don't want to see it, marred by referees or whatever the case may be, or injuries. And I think this tournament had all those things. And that's really what it comes down to me. And that's really all I have to say in terms of that.
Yeah, another fantastic college basketball season. This is a sport that I have loved for the past 10 years plus. I've been watching it every single year, watched all the tournament games. It's just so fun. especially once you get to March and you have the inter-conference tournaments and March Madness with all the upsets. And you have new stories every year that make each tournament so unique. I mean, last year it was a little bit different. You had the Blue Blood Final Four with Villanova, and you had the Coach K retirement tour, and Jay Wright's sort of, I wouldn't say unexpected retirement, but sort of just like surprising retirement after the season. And you had Carolina in their first year with a new coach make the Final Four in their run. I mean, it's just new every year. And then you've had like runs of the past with Loyola Chicago and St. Peter's last year. And I mean, there's just Farley Dickinson this year, Florida Atlantic, San Diego State. The list goes on and on. I think every tournament has a uniqueness to it, which just makes every single March Madness so unique. And so another great college basketball season. I think it's changing possibly for the better, as long as they can put some guardrails on potentially what you can do with NIL and how many times you can transfer. I think, and when you can transfer, like there were some players that were just putting their names in the portal, like right at the start of the tournament, which I didn't necessarily like. But I think there needs to be some guardrails put in place, which I think there will be eventually with new NCAA leadership. But I think college basketball, it's different than it was, say, 5 or 10 years ago. But I think it's probably changing for the better, in my opinion, although I am a college basketball apologist in some ways. So, yeah, I mean, it'll be exciting to see what happens this offseason. We'll be covering the NBA draft in more depth than we did the past couple of years. It's a great draft, and we'll possibly mention some of the guys who have entered their name into the draft between now and then we'll also cover some of the transfer portal stuff and coaching stuff that happens over the course of the next couple months. So that wraps it up for college basketball. We're going to wrap up the last 20-ish minutes of the show with a really fun segment. We want to incorporate more lists into these podcasts. It makes for some good back and forth fodder. We're going to be doing our top 5 NBA players list ahead of the NBA playoffs in about 2 weeks. Now, I did my list based on players that right now I project to make the playoffs. So it may have not included a couple players who could potentially make an argument for like some of the best players in the league, but they're not right now in the playoffs. So I didn't include those players. So let's just go 5-1. Let's just go back and forth 5-1. And I'll start with you.
Well, for me, at number 5, it was really difficult. It was really, really difficult. There's so many superstars in the NBA at the moment, and you have to take into account health and all that type of stuff. But since this is a pre-playoff list, I kind of had a focus on what I think could happen in the playoffs, and that's what affected my list. So at number 5, I had Jason Tatum. I think this stretch from halfway through last season to now has been outside of a couple of stretches of weirdly bad shooting, has been superstar level basketball. And I think this year in particular, I like that he's leaning into, his ability to shoot over the top without having to, step back and do all the fancy stuff. You're 6'8", shoot over shoot over the small guard that's guarding you. Like, that's fine. And also, he's become such an amazing shooter, and people don't even talk about what he's able to do attacking the basket. I think that's a lot of the times that attention goes to Jaylen Brown, and rightfully so. But Jason Tatum is really dangerous attacking the rim, and one of the things that I got on him for last year was the lack of attacking the rim that he was doing, particularly in the playoffs and in the finals. And I think this year he's really addressed that by adding strength and correcting some of his finishing ability at the rim, and that's really pushed him to the next level.
Well. I don't know what our lists look like and how similar they will be, but we both had Jason Tatum at number 5. And I echo a lot of your sentiments. He is a fantastic player, averaging over 30 this year, along with like 5 other guys. That includes your typical Joel Embiid, Giannis. I think Steph is close, but maybe not quite there. And then Shea Gilgeous-Alexander as well. And he's doing a lot of the things this season that we didn't see last year. And what I wanted to mention was just his level of assertiveness and aggressiveness in games, driving to the basket, but also maybe drawing more fouls, getting to the free throw line, just simplifying his game offensively. I think he's a great player and he can do a lot of the things that he was doing, but simplifying it down to the nuts and bolts, oh, I'm a great scorer, I'm a great shooter, I can just shoot over these guys, and I don't have to do this all the extra fluff that comes with being as good as he is, which, I mean, it doesn't really matter in that way, but it feels like he simplified his game a little bit and he's attacking more, which I think will bode well in these slower half court games where, if you're just shooting over everyone every time, some nights shots aren't going to fall and you're going to have to find other ways to affect the game in these slower pace, more intense playoff games, especially on the road. When another team is
Right.
going on a run and you're trying to weather the storm and your jump shots might not be falling, you got to be able to get to the basket, draw fouls, finish around the rim. And that's where Tatum, I believe, is taking the next step. And it's always with Tatum, I think from here on out, how do you just get that 1 or 2% better year over year over year? It's going to be tough now because you've already reached a point where you are a superstar level player. Uh, and it's hard to improve once you get to that level. But I think he will do a good job of finding minutia in his game, which he already has, and improving on that. And that's why I think he's, a top 5 player. But it's just like the greatness of everyone else, I believe, and sort of what I project moving forward uh, has him at number 5. For my number 4, and I guess we can go in a snake type
Right.
draft here. I have Steph Curry just because of his effect on the Golden State Warriors that we all know. I mean, he is the heart and soul of that team. I mean, Draymond Green does some things for them. Klay Thompson, we all know they haven't lost the playoff series when those guys are healthy. He's averaging 29 per game. He went through a tough stretch where he was out with injury, that bruise on his what was his knee or something. But he's still a great shooter. I mean, he averaged his numbers in the finals last year and in the playoffs in general were crazy. He won his first finals MVP. He's done everything under the sun basically that you can in a basketball career. And I just think he's going to be great again come this playoffs. So I think he has to be included on a top 5 NBA players list just based on what he's accomplished and what I think he'll still be able to do because of his greatness as a shooter and then elevating everyone else around him. So I had Steph Curry at number 4.
Yeah, and that's what makes lists like this so tough because there's always someone that's going to be left off the list. And we'll get to that later with both of our lists. But for me at number 4, um, I had Nikola Jokic. This was really, really difficult. Jokic is a unbelievable talent offensively, and there's no question about it. He's probably, the most unique talent, like the most unique offensive talent we've seen in the league ever. As a 7-footer, to put the ball on the floor, be able to pass out of any situation, any angle. I mean, there's really nothing he can't do on the offensive end of the floor, and that's what's the most impressive thing. And the thing people don't talk about with Jokic is obviously the efficiency is there, but also that little flip hook shot that he has in the middle of the lane, he never misses. Like that never misses. And it shows in the numbers and how well he's able to finish in the paint. But that specific shot, um, it's basically unstoppable. And I'm excited to see how he fares in the playoffs this year.
Okay. Who is your number 3?
My number 3 player at the moment is Joel Embiid. Um, Embiid this year um, has in my mind, elevated himself even above what he's done in the past couple years as a perennial MVP level player. But this year, there's a different determination in his game, and I love it. I mean, he's playing with so much physicality. I mean, just backing guys down and just dominating the paint on both sides of the floor. And going into the playoffs now, I think, it's worth mentioning we're seeing a extremely unique talent at the center position, and I think not a lot of people have really talked about Joel Embiid in the historic sense, and obviously that will be changed by how the playoffs go in the next few seasons, but just his body of work this year alone, I mean, he's basically a forward in a 7 foot, 300-pound center's body. Putting the ball on the deck, that little jab step move into his mid range jumper, and then having the game off of that to back you down in the post also, and just dunk over you, just asserting his dominance and kind of having that um, go to um, go to move that is just absolutely unstoppable. That's the one thing I thought was missing in his game, like that one move that you could just rely on in a playoff series. Every, great player in history has one for the most part. And for Joel Embiid, it's just completely backing you down to under the basket and dunking over you. And most of the time getting to the foul line off of that as well.
Yeah, I had Joel Embiid at number 3 as well. And I considered putting him even higher.
Right.
Just because of what he has done this year. I mean, 33 points per game. Does he lead the NBA in scoring, or is he second still? I haven't checked up on that yet. But
Frozen. Okay.
basically, I think that, just what you talked about, right? His dominance, sort of in a, not quite in a on a Shaq level, but sort of in that sense where he is just
Right.
physically dominating in these games. And considering how much he gets fouled and gets to the free throw line, being a pretty solid free throw shooter, being able to step out, knock down the three, that little fall away, 15 footer that he likes to shoot, being able to back people down the post, drop step, dunk. The variety of moves and his footwork, I think, is an underrated part of his game. It makes a lot of what great post players have is really good footwork, and I believe he has that for a guy his size. That's rare. Being able to put the ball on the floor, make plays off the dribble. He has it all. He absolutely has it all, and he could potentially win the MVP this year. So he's definitely got to be in the top 3, and I consider putting him even higher than this, but there are just so many great players that I couldn't. But yeah, I mean, there's not much else I can really say that you didn't already say. I mean, it's just pretty self-explanatory.
Right.
Number 2, since we're going in sort of a snake-like motion, I put Kevin Durant. He is still the same guy. He's been in and out of injury the past couple of years, and that's where you really worry about him. But other than that, I mean, I don't think the Suns have lost a game up until like a couple of days ago. I checked, and they still hadn't lost a game with Kevin Durant in the starting lineup. He's averaging like 25 and 8 and 6 as a Sun on really good efficiency. he changes the game on so many different levels when he's on the court, being able to just pull up from anywhere and score from anywhere over anybody who is defending him. Um, One of the greatest scorers of all time, if not possibly the greatest. I mean, he's in the conversation with what he's been able to do when healthy. His level of production in the postseason with 2 NBA finals, MVPs and this and that. I mean, he's Kevin Durant. I mean, what else do you want me to say?
Yeah.
So I have him at number 2.
Yeah. That's that's fair enough. I had Giannis Antetokounmpo at number 2, and you know, keep in mind, guys, we're really just splitting hairs here. Um, these are all superstar level players that are, no question about it, capable of being the best player on a championship team and have done so. Many of these players have. So with Giannis, I just think his dominance on the floor, his, what, everybody talks about, just his physical tools are so unique. But the thing with Giannis that I think goes under the radar is just his motor. You rarely see a star player show as much consistent effort on the basketball floor as Giannis Antetokounmpo. And I say that I don't say that lightly, first of all. And also, I mean that in a historical aspect as well. If you look throughout NBA history, you would be hard pressed to find a superstar level player who just on, any regular season game goes all out effort. And that's really a credit to him and his mindset and just his tenacity. People don't realize how tiring it is to attack the basket over and over and over again, and how taxing that can be on your body. And he does it night after night. And his finishing ability at the rim and his understanding of the game as well. His passing is so underrated. I remember Eastern Conference Finals against the Raptors. People really got on him for this. Getting into the paint and obviously being dominant, but then not being able to make the right read out of that to punish the defense for sinking in on him. And now it's like clockwork. It's not even, he doesn't even have to think about it anymore. It's just he's so studied within the game and he's such a veteran that it's the right read every time. And yeah, I can't say enough good things about Giannis.
Yeah, neither can I. And I think there was like well, first of all, I have the book that Mir and Fader wrote behind me on Giannis, on like his life up until this point, his interesting background growing up and this and that. And I've read some of it, but I haven't gotten all the way through it yet. I'm looking to finish it during the NBA playoffs. So I'll let you all know how it is and whether or not I recommend it at that time period. But yeah, I mean, there's not really much else I can really add to that. I mean, we saw the historicness of his finals performance, the 50-point game 6 to close out the series, against the Suns. What he did in that finals series alone was historic. And he seems to add something to his game every single year. And I've been standing on this hill, I believe, ever since we did our like NBA players bracket back like maybe a year ago. It was around the time of the NBA playoffs last season.
Right.
Or maybe it was the offseason. I can't remember exactly, but it was about a year ago. Um, I think I had Giannis as my best NBA player, and I've been saying that this season too. And I'm going to stand on that hill until, I think the combination of his physical tools with the ability to get better, the ability to be available, uh, finish around the rim, be dominant, but also be like a point forward, point center at the same time. And he's getting better as a facilitator and like a decision maker, as you spoke to. I just think all around, and he's still not the greatest of shooter yet, and that's probably the one knock that you can still say. But I think he'll continue to get better, and he just keeps getting better, which is scary.
Right.
So I'm sort of a Giannis, I'm a big Giannis fan, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, we're splitting hairs. I mean, it's like Giannis, Joel Embiid, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Steph Curry, Jason Tatum, my list. I mean, we're not even including all of like the younger guys that we have in the NBA right now and more guys that will be coming in the near future. So I think this exercise, and I didn't even include Jokic on my list, not for any particular reason. I don't know why I didn't include Jokic on my list. I just, to be honest with you, it's tough. So that just speaks to like I think the state of the NBA right now. We're in a really good position right now going into these playoffs.
The NBA has never been.
Uh-oh. Now he's frozen. Amy has frozen on my end. No. Oh, there you are. Yeah, now I can see you.
Okay, cool. Well, Kevin Durant, I just think there's something to be said about a player that you can plug in to any system on any team, and you know what he's going to give you. I think with some of these other players, there's something to be said about basketball fit and what they would need around them. And for most of those players, obviously spacing really matters, and obviously that matters for Kevin Durant as well. But Kevin Durant, I just think, is possibly a top 2 scorer of all time, just pure scorer, and no doubt the best I have ever seen. I think, there's a lot that's been said about obviously last year's playoffs, about how, the Nets got swept and Kevin Durant didn't have the best series uh didn't have the best series as well. But I still just think Kevin Durant has the most complete game over some of these other guys, and has proven it over the course of a career. And it's also from a sense of you got to give him his flowers as well. He's 34 years old. He suffered a Achilles injury now 3 years ago, and he's still a top 5 player. No matter how you cut it. And you say what you want about Kevin Durant off the floor. I mean, that's a whole other conversation. And I'm a proponent of, it doesn't really matter in terms of a basketball conversation. And, Kevin Durant is all about basketball all the time. He just wants to hoop. He's made that clear. And I think he's the best player on the planet. That's just where I'm at right now.
Fair enough. And it can go either way. So I think that's a good exercise. Just like we've done a couple exercises here the past couple podcasts that we're sort of in a way slowly ramping up for what's going to be an insane couple months of NBA playoff basketball starting in about 2 weeks. If you didn't check it out, I know it's sort of a short shelf life with some of the stuff that we talk about here on the Raw Prospect podcast, but that's just how it is. I mean, we did our predictions for like how the first round and play-in tournament would play out as it stood like late last week in our last episode. So go check that out. I mean, we still talked about like the teams themselves, which is relevant to now, but the matchups might have changed between now and then because the standings are changing, basically every night almost. So you can still listen to that. We'll have tomorrow another live stream Masters starts on Thursday. We'll have a big Masters preview. We'll be talking about some storylines. 17 or 18 live players are in this field. That's a huge storyline, along with some of the groupings, and Augusta itself is its own different conversation that we talk about every year. So we'll be talking about the course. I know there might be some weather that gets in the way this week as well, so that's another conversation that we can have. And then we'll be doing our player pool draft. We'll pick from a pool of players. I believe there will be 4 or 5 tiers, and we'll draft our players, and we'll sort of decide how we'll work out who wins our little mini competition here on the Raw Prospect Podcast. And then we'll be doing our first mock draft of the draft season, if you will. And the way that will work is it'll be top 10, and we'll just alternate. So I might be odds and Emmy might be evens, or he might be odds and I might be evens, and we'll just alternate between the top 10 teams as we were the GM for those teams, and we'll make our picks live on this podcast with our explanations. So we won't really have anything prepared necessarily, but we'll just be going off the rip, which will be fun. So that'll be a great episode. And then potentially later this week, we'll have some Patreon content for you guys. So be on the lookout for all that. But great college basketball season. And I look forward to what's on the calendar. The sports calendar just keeps chugging along with great stuff. And we'll be covering it all on the Raw Prospect Podcast. So any parting shots?
My parting shot would just be NBA talent is just so incredible. I mean, players that I didn't even mention and hardly even considered. Like even if you you place them in the NBA 5 years ago, 10 years ago, they would be top 3 players, top 4 players. Kawhi Leonard, Ja Morant. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, the talent is just so incredible in the NBA right now.
Right. I echo that sentiment. So with all that being said, and just a quick update, the Bulls have locked in their spot to the NBA play-in tournament with the Orlando Magic's loss tonight. So they are in the play-in tournament. Good for the Chicago Bulls. We'll see what happens. But I guess just like anybody's chances of being any match for the Uconn Huskies over the course of the NCAA tournament, and just like the college basketball season, what a great season it was. And we will be talking about college basketball throughout the offseason, and we'll have to wait 216 days until November 6th when the next college basketball season tips off. We are going, gone. See y'all tomorrow with Masters preview and more draft content. Peace out.
Peace out.